Hello everyone, this is Geno Cuddy coming at you at 1 o'clock p.m. on Friday, December 7th, 2018. And I wanted to come at you and discuss a rather eccentric fellow that I've been researching a little bit lately. I've always had a fascination with this guy ever since I first heard about him and his discovery of this film. I'm referring to the very eccentric and mysterious figure known as Alois Dettlaff. And Alois Dettlaff, for those of you who don't know, was his biggest claim to fame was having a copy in his collection, the only extant copy of the 1910 silent Thomas Edison adaptation of Mary Shelley's novel Frankenstein. This film was thought lost for many, many years. As a matter of fact, for many years, up until I believe the mid-1980s, the only extant photograph or the only extant image from this film was a picture or a photograph of the monster portrayed by a popular character actor at the time, Charles Ogle, that was found on the cover of the Edison Kinetogram, which was an in-house marketer's manual, sort of like akin to what we would now think of as press books or press kits, that the Edison company would distribute to promote their films. They would send these kinetograms, these film magazines, to exhibitors so that they can, hype up these films. That's, again, akin to what we now call press books or press kits. And so that was the only image that that had existed for years and years and years. And it was reprinted in multiple places. I first saw it in a book by the esteemed publisher known as, I believe it was either Crestwood House or Chelsea House, one of the two, and they had a rather legendary line of books on movie monsters. Probably my most favorite entry in that series was a book they did on King Kong. Well, I first saw it in a book on Frankenstein. This image of the monster Charles Ogle, and they labeled it as being a lost film, and that image was the only surviving picture from it. And at the time, I was bummed because I was like, "Oh man, I want to see this." And I also saw it in a book on how to draw movie monsters. They actually had a little graphic illustration of the Charles Ogle version of the monster, which was really, really cool. So I had at least seen it in two places as a child. Always wanted to see it. Other people, like a lot of older people, discovered it for the first time by seeing an image of it in the notorious Famous Monsters of Film Land magazine, headed by the wonderful, late, great Forrest J. Ackerman. So, again, this was the only image thought to have survived, and there was really, at least to us at that time, there's really no hope for ever finding this film. In walks Alois Felix Dettlaff, a native of Cudahy, Wisconsin, and he had lived there all his life. He had grown up there with, I believe, a couple siblings, and his father, at the age of 8, had given him a film projector, and used to run magic shows and film shows in the basement of his father's store. And he would attract wide audiences. They would come from far and wide to see this. I think it was at the time 8 years old, as I stated. This 8-year-old kid essentially putting on an evening's entertainment with live magic shows and silent film shows. Eventually, his interest in magic waned, and he focused primarily on the silent films. And he was known for being rather eccentric and rather he may have had what many people now deem as obsessive compulsive disorder, as he was well known for hoarding his films and being rather stingy and bitter. And in his later years, he was rather eccentric. But let me just discuss his origin stories here. He did serve in World War II, so I believe he was buried with veteran honors. I'm not too sure on that. So he lived in Wisconsin all his life, and he would put on these films. In the 1950s, he acquired a huge quantity of films that he bought from his aunt, who was a projectionist at a theater, and he had acquired all these films, including the aforementioned Frankenstein film, there are a lot of stories that I've heard over the years about who the person he acquired this from was. I heard that his aunt was a projectionist, but an older story that I had heard was that she was actually a long retired vaudevillian performer who would get on stage and perform live music dance interpretations while these films would go in the background, and she would be interpreting whatever's going on screen. Those are two stories that I've heard about her. But really, I all I've found really substantial is that she was a projectionist of some sort. So in this stash of films was the Frankenstein film, the film that we all thought was lost forever and that we would never see. From my understanding, it was rather a huge cache of films that he did acquire. However, I'm unsure as to what the other films actually are. There hasn't even been so much as a single other title mentioned by name. So really the only film that I know of that I'm aware of that he actually has or had was the Frankenstein film from 1910. In the 70s and early 80s, the American Film Institute, the AFI, placed the 1910 Frankenstein film on their list of culturally and historically significant lost films, meaning that these are the films that film collectors from all around the world would love to find, and understandably so that this film would be on there, as it's probably the first horror film ever made. At least the first American horror film ever made. People like to say that, in full disclosure, people like to say that the 1910 Frankenstein film was, in fact, the first horror film ever made. For me personally, I would have to say that's a fallacy, because we do have to consider some of the early works of Georges Méliès, the French pioneering special effects film wizard. Some of his early films, if you look at them now, they are sort of like the genesis of what we would now consider to be the horror film. And so the Frankenstein film was placed on that list, and Al Dettlaff was led to be aware of this, and in 1986 he was actually invited by the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences to have a meeting with one of their top guys, Robert Wise, who I believe was an editor on Orson Welles' Citizen Kane. And by that point, he was working full-time for the Academy. So they had the meeting. Somebody videotaped it. I was reading an article on a local patch site, and I would just love to see that videotaped exchange. And just see what type of a personality Al Dettlaff had, because from all accounts he was a pretty out there guy. So out there that in later years, once he found out, the rarity of this Frankenstein film, that he would actually, in his older age, he had a long white beard, and he would dress up in a tricorn wizard's hat. He would have an hourglass affixed to his neck as if it were a necklace type deal, and he would carry around like a scythe, like a Grim Reaper's like scythe. And he would bring a megaphone with him, shouting, "Oh, Wisconsin, oh, Wisconsin," and we'd be playing music over the megaphone, and he would march in local parades and everything. Pretty much the town kook. You could pretty much call him that. And he would coin that character, Father Time. And he would go to all these film conventions, because for years before he had known that the Frankenstein film was rare, he would actually go to several film conventions, monster movie showings, and he would show this film, not knowing how rare it was. And he had actually shown it so much that over time it got severely damaged, and you have to wonder too what type of conditions he was storing these films in. I mean, the thing with especially films that old, they were printed on what's called nitrate film stock. And nitrate film stock, if you ever watched the actually really well produced Giorgio Moroder documentary, The Fading Image, they explain it very well, point blank, that nitrate film stock was made from the same material that they used to make gunpowder with. So because of the fragile nature of that material, it's led to, at times, spontaneously combust. There are stories of several movie theaters and several vaults catching fire and people losing their lives because people just didn't know how to handle these films. Later on, we drifted away from using nitrate film, thank goodness. I mean, the look of nitrate film is beautiful, but the risks involved in doing that, I think, outweigh the beauty of the film. In my honest opinion, people's lives matter more than how beautiful a film looks. I mean, in my God's honest opinion, I mean, film snobs may disagree with me, but that's the state of affairs, at least in my mind. So this Frankenstein film was on that nitrate film stock, and because again he had played it so much, there was actually a bit of shrinkage. If you watch, and I'm going to get into this later, the newly restored version that's come out, in the first few frames of the film, you will notice actually a lot of jump cuts and a lot of sprocket holes, because there was just so much shrinkage involved because it had just been played so much over time. And he would not only, this is actually a really cool fact that I had learned about Mr. Dettlaff, he actually would use these silent films as a means to teach his children how to read. Because these silent films had no dialogue and only music and title cards, he would teach his children how to read by having them read the title cards in these films, which I thought was rather interesting. And he wanted to share his fascination with these silent films with his children. Unfortunately, his children couldn't care less about this. And because of that, over the years, Al Dettlaff became really embittered, and he really started to close himself off from the rest of society because, nobody really had any interest in this material, and he really sectioned himself off and sanctioned himself off, and he really didn't want to have anything to do with society. As a matter of fact, I was actually reading an article just a few minutes ago where somebody had actually typed verbatim, word for word, his phone message that whenever you would call him, this would be the phone message that you would get. And I'm going to try and repeat it from memory here. I'm not at the phone at this time. If you are a solicitor, please leave your phone number so I could report you. If not, please leave your name, number, and a message, and I'll be more than happy to get back to you. He was kind of a paranoid guy too, and that shows through his handling of this Frankenstein film. Now there are a lot of people out there, and I just gotta get this out there too. There are a lot of scumbags out there, a lot of dirtbags, slime balls out there that say that Al Dettlaff deserved to die because of the way he hoarded these films and kept these films from the public eye. I don't think we should equate a man's rather eccentric behavior regarding the withholding of a film with the with his death. I don't think we should equate one thing with another, because that's not only comparing apples to oranges, but it's also a pretty dickish thing to say, that a man deserved to die because he didn't let you see one of his movies. That's pretty dickish. In my personal opinion, I think that's pretty dickish. And so the meeting went over. Unfortunately, he didn't. The whole purpose for the meeting was for Al Dettlaff and Robert Wise to preserve the film, properly, and save it for posterity and future generations to study and enjoy and whatever. But unfortunately, because of the fact that Mr. Dettlaff was so paranoid with his films, he held on to him like really hard, and he rarely, if ever, let them out of his grasp. As a matter of fact, the only before 2005 or 2003, the only other times anybody would have ever even seen these films would be in documentaries. Sometimes there would be documentaries that would actually use footage from his film. And they would use snippets. They would have to credit him and all of that. But then, he would later discover that these clips of his Frankenstein film that were lifted from this documentary and were put onto bootleg videotapes that were sold on the gray market. So that's I understand that, that he wanted to protect this thing because he saw some sort of value in it, and this would probably be his only claim to fame. So I could understand that. And so he became really reclusive and everything when he got really, really older. Plus, I had read that he lost his brother in 2002, and I think at that point he really, really became reclusive. He had always, been such an eccentric guy anyway. And, I'm going to say this also in full disclosure. I could fully relate to the guy because, let me tell you, in high school, I really had nobody to discuss my interest in silent films with. Everybody in high school is all interested in the newest and the latest and greatest films like Transformers, Twilight, all these superhero movies coming out, and I could care less about films like that. And I really wanted to discuss like Douglas Fairbanks and The Thief of Baghdad, or D.W. Griffith's marvelous epic Intolerance, or Charlie Chaplin and the Gold Rush. And these were films that nobody, and I mean nobody, in my high school were even talking about. Actually, the only people that I could really discuss these films with were teachers, like my creative writing teacher, Mr. Frankel, and of course the cinema studies teacher, Ron Flash, who, quite hilariously enough, I actually took 2 English classes my junior year, and the only reason why I took his class, I took it on an audit. I audited that class, so I didn't get graded for it, but I wanted to attend that class so I could just see these wonderful films on a big screen and, actually feel like I'm a part of this, whole film movement, and be able to interject my 2 cents, because I've been a film scholar ever since I was 6 years old. I was probably, I don't want to sound narcissistic here, but I think I was far more ahead of the game than a lot of my peers at the time, because a lot of my peers treated this as just something to pass time and just to watch movies. They didn't want to study up on it like I did. So I established a really good bond with Ron Flash, really, really good guy. So getting back to Al Dettlaff, I mean, yeah, I could totally understand, how he just became bitter and reclusive and just angry at the world because, he loved products, he loved material that at the time and even still to this day is a very niche interest at best. I mean, you'd think like a film like The Artist, for example, would have, brought upon a renaissance of silent films and silent films discussion and study, but it really didn't, unfortunately. It really didn't do its intended job. I think that was what it was really intended for, was to, bring about a discussion, which sadly never happened. Um, it so Al Dettlaff in 2003 at the behest of a lot of film collectors, in particular a gentleman by the name of Frederick C. Weeble, who wrote a book on Edison's Frankenstein, which unfortunately I do not have at this time. I was friends with him for a little while, but sadly we lost contact over the years. But he's a great guy, and he wrote a great book on the subject. So at his behest, he actually got Dettlaff to finally release this film on DVD in some fashion. And I actually do have this DVD somewhere. I don't know where it is, but I do have it. And it was called Movies First Monsters, back to back. And so, because of the fact that the Frankenstein film is only 12 minutes long, he released it on a double bill with a Museum of Modern Art print of Nosferatu. This is like the more famous print that uses the names from the Stoker novel rather than the original film itself. So that DVD sold well. People took a lot of umbrage with Al Dettlaff's watermarking tactics and practices. Because actually, when Weeble originally issued out his book, some rare editions actually came with a copy of the film itself on VHS. And this copy of the film, a lot of film fans, were very annoyed and scorned with this because there would be a watermark that would scroll up every 5 seconds saying "Property of Alois Dettlaff," "Property of Alois Dettlaff," and imagine, sitting through a 12-minute film and seeing that every 5 seconds. You're bound to get annoyed with that after a while, and it makes the film unwatchable, in my opinion, to do something like that. I mean, if you want to watermark your work, that's fine, but do it in a way that isn't, abrasive to the film going experience. And so Al Dettlaff did just that in 2003. He issued this film, but he did put watermarks on it to ensure that if anyone was caught bootlegging it, he could determine the source. Unfortunately, that really didn't help his cause too much because immediately after it sprang onto the market, people just wound up uploading it to YouTube, and you can find dozens upon dozens of copies of the film on YouTube now. Unfortunately, Alois Dettlaff, passed away in, I believe, June or July of 2005, and the story of his death is actually quite creepy. Apparently, he had collapsed onto his bathroom floor, and it took well over a month for people to find his body. Nobody, because his daughter, he was really cut off from people. By that time, he had cut himself off from his son and even his daughter. His daughter hadn't heard from him in well over a month. I do have to say his rather bitter and reclusive personality did nothing to help that. He had been lying on his bathroom floor dead for well over a month before anybody found him, and when police found him, his body had already really badly decomposed. It looked... I haven't seen pictures, and I wouldn't want to see pictures, but from seeing a picture of Al Dettlaff while he was alive in his later years, I can only imagine what that corpse looked like after literally lying there for about a month. It must have looked pretty freaky, dude. And the place must have smelled horrible because it was reported that his house was always hotter than hell because he never put the air on, and it was found in the hot months of summer 2005. And I could just imagine what it was like to find his body all badly decomposed, looking like practically flesh on a skeleton, pretty much. And even though Al Dettlaff himself didn't have a happy ending to his story, at least the Edison Frankenstein film did. In 2014, the Library of Congress, the wonderful Library of Congress, actually acquired the Dettlaff collection They purchased it from his daughter. And they immediately, once they got the Frankenstein film, they immediately started a preservation process for that. And I believe in either 2016 or 2017, they finally completed a 1080p high definition restoration of the film, which I'm very, very happy about. I'm actually very, very happy about that because this film is now available for everyone to see in the best possible quality. I mean, you have to realize this film is over 108 years old. And it has a lot of techniques in it that are actually quite innovative, like the use of reverse image photography. And some of the effects work is actually quite decent for the time. Not to mention the least of which, the wonderful makeup actually designed by Charles Ogle himself for that part. So it was actually really, really cool to see the film in its best possible quality. Um, so I am glad that the 1910 Frankenstein film had a happy ending. I mean, we could only wish that certain films out there would get the same sort of treatment, same sort of discovery. I mean, say what you will about Al Dettlaff and his eccentricities, but at least the man preserved this film for future generations, and he took really, really good care of it. I mean, most people not well versed in film would have just let it rot and decay, but he actually really took care of this film, and he cleaned it regularly, and he took really good care of it. So you have to give him that. You have to give him his props on that, at least. I mean, yeah, he was an eccentric fellow, but I think, to be quite honest and to be fair, a lot of people in the film preservation society are actually very eccentric people themselves. I should know. I know many of them. Um, but yeah, Al Dettlaff and this whole story has always fascinated me. And then of course, like in 2008, we find the missing footage to Metropolis. I mean, here's the thing with me. I believe it's only a matter of time before we find Lon Chaney's London After Midnight. I mean, that's the big go-to film that everybody wants to see is London After Midnight. And I have to be completely honest with you. If we are able to preserve and rediscover, if we were able in the year 2017 to restore a film that people thought was lost for years in marvelous 1080p high definition, if we were able to do that the very same process back in 2010 with the restoration of Fritz Lang's Metropolis, if we were able to complete both of those projects with films that people thought were lost forever, or partially lost forever, I think that, in my honest opinion, I want to be realistic with this, of course, but I also want to be optimistic with it as well. I could, see a London After Midnight being just around the corner. I mean, the thing is, with me is, what I would love to do, or and even if I'm not personally involved with it, it would be great if, there was some semblance of a program like American Pickers, but for like silent films, like get a call from like such and such. Hey, I have these films in an attic. Why don't you come take a look at them and see if you can do anything with them? I think that would be a marvelous television program to have. And because I bet you, there are some people in this country and surrounding countries that have these films in their attic or in their basement, and they don't even know what they have because they're in an unmarked film can, and they haven't even bothered to look through these reels. And that's actually how we've discovered a lot of lost films. It's through that process of going through unmarked film cans and just finding and everything else. I mean, just take a look at. I'm going to use this film as an example, even though it's not the best film in the world. Manos: The Hands of Fate, the 1966 cult film directed by Harold P. Warren. Ben Solovey, he acquired this whole huge collection of films from this guy that really did not know what he had, and lo and behold, after so many years of trying to find a good quality print of it. lo and behold, there was not only a decent theatrical print of it, but also a work print of it. For those of you not to know, a work print is a preliminary print of the film before any post production is done. And he also found a film called Monstrosity, or The Atomic Brain, which, along with Manos, The Hands of Fate, was featured on the cult classic bad film riffing series, Mystery Science Theater 3000. So yeah, I mean, this whole thing with film preservation, I'm glad to see these films being preserved. It warms my heart because of the fact that I have been a film fan since I was 6 years old, and I've always had an interest in the older films and the silent films. So in my God's honest opinion, from my years of, doing this research and everything else, we could see London After Midnight in our futures, and in our lifetimes. I could see that happening. Maybe even finding the Marx Brothers lost silent film Humorisk from 1920, I don't think is too much of an improbability. Because if we could find the missing footage to Metropolis, and if we could preserve the Edison Frankenstein, there's no reason, in my opinion, that we can't find any of these other films. So I'm going about 30 minutes here, about to hit the 31-minute mark. It's 1:31 p.m. on Friday, December 7th, 2018. This has been Geno Cuddy, and I hope you've enjoyed this little conversation about Alois Dettlaff and his most famous discovery. It was really an interesting story reading up on him and discovering all that I could about him. Because the thing is he was a fascinating man. And, I empathize with him because I was in the same boat that he was in high school. Nobody really gave a damn about this stuff, but you know what? I still had a huge interest in it, and unfortunately for myself as well, I wound up cutting off contact from people. But you want to know what? Me and Al Dettlaff, guys like us, we're the ones that are actually we're movers and shakers, and we do the thing. So, anyway, with that, this has been Geno Cuddy, and I hope you guys have enjoyed this little discussion about Al Dettlaff, the 1910 Frankenstein film, and film preservation in general. I love talking about film. I love talking about film preservation and silent films. It brings me back to my roots, and it brings me back to when I was a little kid discovering this stuff for the first time. So alright guys, I'll be talking to you later. It's 1:32 p.m. on Friday, December 7th, 2018. This has been Geno Cuddy, and this has been an episode of Cuddy's World. I hope you guys had a great time listening to this, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your week, and thank you for listening. And by the way, if you would like to email me, please feel free to do so. The email is gcuddy.ew@gmail.com. That is gcuddy.ew@gmail.com. You can email me. You can give me suggestions and stuff. You can also read up on my blog, which is cuddysworld.blogspot.com. You could follow me on Facebook. My Facebook is facebook.com/official Geno Cuddy. That is GenoCuddy. You could also follow me on Twitter @officialGenoC. And feel free to, give me a shout out anywhere. Alright guys, I'll be talking to you later, and I hope you all have a great rest of your week. Thank you so much.